What's going on, creative family? It's Dustin Volkema, and welcome to today's image review. We're taking a look at a 3D fan art of a Full Metal Alchemist poster by a 3D artist by the name of Quan Ta. I get the chance to work with this guy in studio quite often, and we have these discussions, so it's pretty exciting for me to be able to review his work for you guys here, rather than just the one-on-one in-person stuff that we do often. So let's get it started, folks. I'll catch you in Photoshop. Alrighty, so here we are in Photoshop, and before I get to any of this feedback, Quan, what I will say is that you did a great job. Knowing from just a previous discussion or the email that you had sent, everything from the modeling here, and I really like the lighting here for the most part. Textures look great. So this is something that I'll probably get a little bit nitpickier with, so that I can maybe give some preferences and things that I might change on a personal level. So let's just get started with that. So the first thing when I zoomed in when I got the image is something looked off on the little greeble pieces of metal or the mechanical bits here that are kind of scattered around the image. So we'll just go ahead and place a circle on these. So what looked off to me was that they looked almost like they were blurred, which I'm assuming is either from a denoise pass or you actually blurred the texture that's there. So that's something that if you're going to have anything blurred on the outside of an image through like an iris blur or anything of that sort, then I would just do that to the overall image so that you're not just hitting certain details like this that you may not feel are very prominent in your scene, but for somebody like myself to look at this, they kind of stick out like a sore thumb because the lack of texture there really stands out to me. And so since you sent me the PSD, I can kind of take a look around here and see what's going on. Okay, so that looks like primarily lighting enhancements, and right here, I would say that this is probably the culprit. Zoom in there. Oh, okay, I see what it is here. Okay, so it is actually just the denoise pass. I actually really like the detail that's coming in with those there. So if it were me, I would just leave that at a full render. I can see this one here is like a half denoise. And I would just take both of those out. So we'll just group those and label this red and turn that off. All right, now the next thing that really stuck out to me in this image had to do more with the color of the backdrop versus the robotic arm here. And you can see in the reference here that they went a bit more grayscale. You do have some grunge in there, but we'll call that, say, a white or a gray backdrop, which really lends itself to not distract the eye with more color than what's actually needed in the scene. And then that can place the proper emphasis both on the arm and the stone here. So what I would do is just go ahead and desaturate. We can just write desat. We can desaturate the backdrop. And so what I'll do is create a new group here. And we'll just say DV edit. And I see that you have a wire color. So we can talk about your passes here in a moment. Let's change this normals pass back to normal and 100%. All right. So what we can do is just grab, let's see, the background color and head down to, we'll just say vibrance. We can take the vibrance down quite a ways and see, actually, you know what, we'll take the vibrance all the way down to leave a little bit of color there. And then we can create a curves adjustment layer that I think should really help. You can already see here that it's helping bring a little bit more pop and emphasis to the robotic arm there. We can bring those whites down just a tad because we can add something in there a little bit later, which will probably just be like a grunge texture or something that will help out. So we'll do, let's see, DV edit. We can call this background. All right, so in moving along, I got a little bit nitpicky with a couple things here, and I can explain why this is. So in your render, I think that the back of this arm looks great, and everything looks fairly natural until you get to the hand and say the piece of the thumb that are sitting here. And I like what they did in the original poster here, because they have a little bit of an angle or a rotation to the pieces that are kind of laid out. So say with this thumb, I would almost like to see this kind of rotated just a little bit, so that, say in the reference, you can see that the thumb has a really nice shadow there, and it's dark, and it really kind of helps that stand out. And with your thumb piece here that's flat, not only does it catch the light differently, but it really doesn't, it doesn't give any sense of like true depth to that. So that's something that I might change, as well as the hand here. There's really two ways that you could do this. Is you could just take the hand and then rotate that slightly. What it will do is give a little bit more depth under the fingers. And then you can also have the fingers in somewhat of a slightly more relaxed pose rather than just straight out. And this is something that you can see here in the reference, that you actually have some space that's happening right under the hand here, because you can see these shadows here where they're quite a bit more harsh, and then you've actually got light that passes through right under these fingers. And so I think that that's something that we can really I think would maybe help it just kind of look a little bit more natural, just give a little bit more depth to it. Now, that's just, like I said, that's being a little bit more nitpicky, but it's something that would just kind of help that stand out and have some kind of depth. And then maybe, that would help accentuate some of the roll and the shadow that's going to be happening here on the hand as well. Now, when I went to zoom in here a bit, what I did see is that you do have some detail that's sitting right inside of this hole where this bolt went here. And it's very hard to see any of that detail when you're zoomed back quite a ways. So what I might do, say in that specific area, is just pop the exposure in there just a little bit. And what we can do is maybe just bring this up here, bring the exposure up. We can bring some of the shadows down so it's not too crazy, and invert this layer mask. So what we'll do is just paint just a little bit there on the inside, and you can follow right along with the light direction or not. But you can see there that automatically gives you some kind of a sense of the depth to the hole that's there, so that it doesn't just look like it's a black hole with nothing inside. I think the one thing that is to be noticed when you're dealing with any type of mechanical structure, or say robotic android arms, whatever, is that there's always another layer of depth. So whether there's wires under here, whether there's just the casing with say threading for a bolt, anything like that, it's just really good to make sure that you have some of that detail there that's present. So it'd be really good to keep that in mind. And the next thing, on a little bit more of a nitpicky realm here, is that there's really not any breakup of color that's going on here with the wires. So you did a really good job of modeling all of the wires in, but what I might like to see is having a breakup. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. We can just create a quick adjustment layer. So let me pause before I move on to that. So this all has to really do with the channels or the render passes that you kick out of the software here. And what I can say is that alongside a wireframe or a wire color pass, what I typically like to do personally is have like a material ID so that you can go and select everything with a similar material or the same material, so everything will kind of be broken up. Or in addition to that, I like to have an object ID to where each individual object has its own color. So that'd be a little bit more of like, you would call a clown pass. But whatever that is, it's just something that to where you can go through and you can actually select, say, each individual cable or groups of cables, things like that when you're working in post-production. That might help out quite a bit. But for this one here, we just want to add some quick color to the cables. So we'll say solid color. We can choose red. That's cool. We'll set that to overlay or soft light. Overlay is fine. Invert that layer mask. Oh, did not mean to press that. Okay. All right. Control I. There we go. And then what we can do is just head in and paint, say one of these wires here. Always follow that off to the back side to where, you say you've got, that wire has to go somewhere. So most of the time when I'm dealing with something like this that would be open, I would just go through and just, if you're doing this in post, I think it's an easy enough change just to consider while you're in Max or wherever you're rendering this. But it would be a good idea to kind of break this up just a little bit and yeah, just add a little bit more color. It gives some nice depth to the image. So we'll say whatever, we can just do green. We'll do a green one. So we can select that. Just go ahead and delete it. But you get the idea. So we'll just paint one of these guys here green. You don't have to do red and green wires, of course. It's just something here so we can visually see it. But I think that this would actually, help out quite a bit because it does add just another, layer of depth and complexity to, to the image that you're doing here. So wherever this one would go, I have no idea. So we can just say that. I'll just say that it comes down this way. How about that? But either way, we can see here that adds a little bit more of just the depth to the detail. Helps it look like you were a little bit more meticulous while you were doing the modeling or the rendering, shading and lighting, all that kind of stuff. Just the little details in that area help out a lot. All right, so next we are going to take a look at what you've got going on with the actual shader that's on the arm here. And I did notice that you didn't have a reflection pass. I see this light pass or light 2. Not sure what that is, so let's set the screen. Let's take a look here. See if we can see. Okay, so that's not quite what we're looking for. Now, what I would do here most of the time, Quan, is make sure that you have some kind of a specular and reflection layer, or you can just have a direct reflection, whatever the case, so that you actually you can add more say like environment reflections to this arm. And the reason why that is if you look at the reference here, you can see that there are a couple of areas where this almost gets chromy, and that's primarily, say, happening on the larger joint here that's on the wrist. And so it's really, you can see a little bit here, that may be a little bit kind of hinting more of a reflective surface. So what I would do is I would just take really just pay attention to those kind of things when you're working on a piece like this, so that you can make sure to get those kind of details. So in yours here, it looks quite a bit more matte, which I don't necessarily mind until you kind of see the reference and then realize that, oh, there should be a little bit more of a reflectivity or a reflective property going on there. And I'm not sure if we can really do that too well, without spending quite a bit of time here. But what I would say is just to make sure that you add some of those kind of details in. Um, we can go ahead and try something here just for the sake of demo purposes. So let's see if we just get rid of our markup and press Controller Command Alt Option Shift and E. That'll merge all of the visible layers here into a single layer on top. And we can head down into channels and see what the three of these look like. So what we'll do is actually just grab our red channel. We can duplicate that and then see if we can create some kind of mask real quick to really push some of these, some of the levels there. Let's see here. All right, and we can go ahead and create a levels adjustment or a curves adjustment. And then we'll select the hand there. And I'll play with these. Let's see. So we're getting a little bit more of what might look like a reflective surface, but it still has quite a bit of roughness to it, in the sense that it still looks quite matte. So it's definitely something that I would keep in mind as you start to, go a little bit further with your shaders, is just adding a little bit more of like a reflective property. And then if you do go into something like multi-pass compositing, it's very easy to go in and remove the reflection from your final composite, just by using a layer mask or, painting over something like that, that you can really kind of push those details a little bit more. So before we get into talking about the lighting and shadows here, let me head back down to the curves layer here that I adjusted when we did just the basic desaturation of the background. And we can drop the opacity of this layer down quite a bit. Then maybe just use the saturation slider and kind of remove some of the color there. And then on this layer mask, what I'll do is I'll just paint some of this back out, because I don't think that we need all of those shadows gone, because I like them for the most part. The primary reason for doing this initially was to drop the exposure of the area right here under the gem, but it definitely doesn't need to be fully removed. So get some of these shadows back. Now, what I do really like about the reference image here is where you see these longer shadows happening. Something that I really think helps kind of add quite a bit to the poster image, especially this one here on the bottom. And in your image here, you can see that it's almost lit more from the top down, it looks like, just kind of in this area here. So it's very much more flat lighting. And what I could see is if you just adjusted, say the angle a little bit there of the light to maybe hit on the other side of, even lower, really just lower to the backdrop, so that you can get quite a bit more shadows that are really happening this way here. That will be quite a bit longer. And then if you're using 3ds Max, I believe that they have a directionality on their lights. I'm not sure if you're using V-Ray for this one, but I would just make sure that you can push these just a little bit, which might be tough to do in the 3D package. So there are certain ways that I may handle that in Photoshop, and it'll actually be quite easy. So what we can do is grab a curves layer here, and we can just drop the exposure here on the midtones quite a bit, and press Control I to invert that layer mask. And we can just grab a polygonal lasso and pretty much just go in and kind of, create these shadows. So we'll just fill that with white. You can do the same thing here on this side. Fill that one with white. And grab this whole area here. Missed a little bit there. Kind of off on the edge. And just go ahead and paint that out. Even a little bit on the thumb here. We don't have to do the whole thing. It's just kind of showing you more how it might be done, or a way that you can do that quite easily in post. And so now with these areas sitting there a little bit, what we'd want to do is just kind of blur the edges. So a quick way to do that is just to go to filter, we'll go to blur, say Gaussian blur. Now we can throw quite a small radius at this. It doesn't really need to be anything too high to destroy a lot of the detail that's there. But say something along those lines, get rid of that guy. And then we can just grab a black brush, grab a large soft round brush, and you can just paint some of these out here, just to show that the shadow is diminishing here over the space that it's covering. You can do the same thing here on the bottom, and then we can just remove some of that here from the inside of this arm. You could easily use one of your ID passes for this, but I'm not too concerned with that. But yeah, so you can see there that helps just as a quick way to add some of those shadows in. You can't get as detailed as you want, just to add you say more detail to the shadows, or pieces that might be a little bit more broken up than the other. But that's definitely a quick way just to go in and add that. All right, so we can remove some of this here. Let's see, from this curves adjustment that we threw on the hand here. You can pull some of that out of there because we don't need it affecting the whole thing, just certain bits of it. So for this arm here, I might just go in and fiddle around with the color here a little bit. And we can, let's see, we can just drop some of the exposure and maybe do kind of a split tone deal here, where we can pull just a little bit of the color out, and then the shadows really more just pulling just a little bit of the blue out of the shadows, and then we can pull some out of the highlights as well. It just kind of helps that look a little bit more grungy. We can also maybe head into, let's see, we can head into a gradient map. And what we can do with this gradient map here is just reverse this so that our highlights and shadows are working right. And we can just go ahead here and just sample, say, the blue color from your reference. And then, actually, we did that backwards. We can sample the lighter color there from the reference. And the shadow color, we can grab the darker, maybe more blue colors here. All right, so we can click OK. We can actually just create a clipping mask, so that works right over the curves layer that we had just created, which this will kind of get rid of some of the curves adjustments, but that's okay. It's just the demo, nothing crazy. And we can just set this to, we can try hue, we could try color. I think hue will work fine, and we can just drop the exposure or the opacity of that just a little bit. So it doesn't really do too much, but you can see here that it just adds a little bit more of a breakup or a variation in color. We can actually go ahead and paint some of that out here in the rust spots that you maybe want to be a little bit more red rust rather than kind of a mildewy green. But yeah, either way, so overall, that's kind of where that would sit. So I'm thinking that if we grab a hue saturation, or we'll grab a vibrance, so we have either of those controls, and what I'm focused on right now is just a little bit more the coloring, that's like the color differences that's happening here between the forearm and the hand. And so we can see if that, like, just kicking up the saturation will help that at all. Let's see here, that's actually not working the way we wanted it to because that's pulling off of the gradient map. So we can just copy the mask here off to the other side. So we just copied that layer mask over to the vibrance. And it doesn't actually look like there's too much that's really happening here. So what I would do at this point is just maybe mask out the hand. So if we grab our lasso tool and we alt click this layer mask, we can just select the arm here, the rest of the arm, and get rid of that. And so now we at least have a little bit more of a fall off that's, kind of going on between the colors there. Initially that did have quite a bit more of like a cyan, or not a cyan, but a magenta or red hue to it. So I think that helps quite a bit there. That was originally from the background, so we can get rid of that. And that just kind of makes those there a little bit more cohesive and grungy. And I can even drop this guy just a little bit. Alrighty, so if we turn the markup on, the last two things that I'm really looking at here that I might adjust in this image primarily have to do with the gem here on top, and maybe just a little bit more of, like, say, an actual grunge texture here on the bottom. So when I'm looking at this gem, what I'd really like to see is maybe a little bit more of like a crimson, a dark ruby color, something that's sort of mimicking the one here a little bit better in the reference, as well as like the reflection and the caustics that are kind of coming off of that guy. So this is originally why I dropped some of the exposure a little bit here up on top at first. But we can go ahead here and just grab this and see what we can do with it. So I'll head into your wire color. We can just grab the gray there for the ruby. And we'll create a curves layer and just see if we can drop this just a little bit and kind of overall exposure. And then to grab some of the color here from the other guy, we can actually, let's just say, grab a solid color and create a clipping mask. And we can select one of these more crimson colors there. And see what happens when you use that on, say, a color. Yep, there we go. Just you do that on a color overlay. Now what we can do here is just create a new layer and have a white brush with decent hardness. It doesn't need to be too much, but we can go in and kind of just paint some of those refractive properties that you might normally see here, kind of matching the reference. And so I see these are turned a little bit opposite here, but that's all fine. So we can just paint these in just a little bit. And now for these darker edges, we can go ahead and set this guy. Maybe set that to an overlay. Overlay is fine. Actually, let's do soft light. But it'll be okay for right now. So now with these edges here that are a little bit darker, now we can just go ahead and actually probably just grab a darker brush, since we're already sitting on a soft light here. You can just paint right around some of these edges here. Grab a little bit darker and just paint some of these edges in. Now, typically what I would do is I would use like maybe some kind of a inverse AO, like when you have your passes here. If this was something that I say couldn't get in the actual shader, I would just probably use my AO pass and add some of these details in here just a little bit. Because what you're really wanting is just for this to pop out a little bit more and have a little bit more of a sense of dimension to it. So to do this quickly, now we kind of get here, we can reset and maybe paint some white highlights in here a little bit, and then throw a layer on top of that on normal, and then just paint right back over these here so that you have a nice color breakup on the bottom, and then you can follow up with a little bit more of the color edges, or throwing more of a highlighted edge on that bottom pass there. So we can increase our brush size, just give a little bit more breakup to the colors that are actually happening there on the top side. But that's good enough for now. You get the gist of it. So what we'll want to do here is add a little bit of the light that's refracting through the gem. And so to add that fairly quickly, you can just create a new layer here and kind of start painting that in. And we can grab the layer mask here from the other one and just invert that so that we're not actually painting on the gem now. And you can just paint some of these details in. We can paint it in and then, kind of remove it as needed. So we'll just flip to a black brush and kind of get off some of these sides here. And so what you're really wanting to do is just kind of, you can see sort of the streaky nature of it there. Some of that's happening from the caustics that are coming through onto the floor. And what we can do is just use that layer mask for those and just kind of paint those areas back out just a little bit here. And then just kind of soften these edges up a little bit. But you get the idea. So something like that there, that kind of really helps it pop some. And if you really wanted to, say, add like a gleam to it or anything like that, I would just grab, say, a white brush, and you can just paint that on, the couple little areas that you might need to, just to make those kind of edges gleam here a little bit. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is maybe the use of a soft light texture to add a little bit more grunge and grime to the backdrop here on the bottom. So what we can do is I found an image here in my library. We can just pull that in, scale it to fit the image. We'll flip it vertical, set it to soft light. And then what we can do here is also say just mask this off by the hand using a layer mask. Oh, sorry, actually, just invert that, the backdrop, not the hand. And we can see that it just adds a little bit more of a grunge and grime to it. Obviously, I might find something that doesn't particularly have all of these design elements in it, but I actually kind of like it here. It just adds just a little bit more complexity there without actually drawing your eye to it completely. And so that works. One thing that I thought about here, Quan, that may not be a big deal, but if you were actually to use this for something like a poster, would really be paying attention to the negative space that you have here in the image overall, which would primarily be just moving, say, this gem in the arm down kind of towards the elbow area, like you can see in the reference. And what that will really do is just give you the space to go ahead and type, put any type of copy here at the top. It just gives you the room, so you can still have this focal point of the gem, which would be right around this area, and then the hand would say be starting here and then move down. So that would help out quite a bit. Alright guys, so that wraps up this feedback session. Thank you, Quan, for sending me this image. I know we took a little bit long on this one, but I wanted to get nitpicky on a couple things that could hopefully help you grow a little bit faster. Now, if you guys want your images reviewed, make sure to email me at dvytedit@gmail.com with feedback in the subject, and I'll go through and kind of vet them out, figure out what's the best to do. And then as soon as I get a chance, I'll make sure to do a video like this for you guys. So yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, click the bell icon so you guys are notified when I upload more content, and I will see you guys in the next review.